Hey, I'm Mary. My life has been quite a ride, like ripping off a band-aid. Quick, a bit painful, and mostly forgettable. If you've got a minute, grab a seat. I've got a story that might make you feel better about your own crazy family. Let's start with my so-called family. Picture a cute little house with a white picket fence, a backyard barbecue, and a dog named Buster who's missing some fur. That's where the picture-perfect image ends. Inside that house was my big sister Linda, the queen bee. Then there was me, just buzzing around like a worker bee, barely noticed. I've got to give it to Linda. She knew how to work the system. She was blonde, had a smile that could light up a room, and a way with words that made our parents melt. She got everything: shiny new bike, last slice of pizza, and even the cozy sweater I wanted for Christmas. Yep, that went to Linda too. When she turned on the charm, it was game over. "Mom, Dad, can I please get that dress for prom?" she'd ask, batting her eyes, and they fell for it every time. Meanwhile, I got the leftovers and hand-me-downs. But don't get me wrong, I wasn't starving or anything. I had clothes and a roof over my head, but life wasn't exactly handing me any silver spoons. Now, about my folks' dad had a job that left him with grease under his nails and a tired smile. Mom was a wizard in the kitchen and could sniff out nonsense unless it came from Linda. When Linda got into that fancy college with the big lawns and ivy-covered walls, it was like Christmas came early and stayed forever. Mom and Dad threw a party that could wake the dead. But by the time I started thinking about my own future, the excitement was long gone. Suddenly, it was all, money's tight, Mary, and real life's about making sacrifices, you know. I remember when they told me the news. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg. Dad was scratching the back of his neck, a sure sign he didn't want to talk about it. "Mary, we've been looking at the numbers, and it's not looking good," he said. "You've got to be realistic, Mary," Mom added, even though she was just stirring her coffee that didn't need it. "College isn't cheap. Maybe it's time to think about getting a job, you know, to help out a bit." The way they avoided saying it straight, you'd think they were telling me Buster ran away to join the circus instead of just saying my dreams were too expensive. So there I was, not even 20, facing the fact that college wasn't in the cards. But I wasn't going to give up. My plan was simple. Work hard, save every penny, and one day, I'd make it to that courtroom with a SQ after my name. The jobs I took weren't anything special. By day, I was serving coffee and dodging crumbs, and by night, I was up to my elbows in soap, washing dishes at a rundown diner. "You've got to be the hardest working person I know, Mary," Karen said one night in our small, dingy kitchen. She was a freelance graphic designer with a laugh that could light up the whole block. "Yeah," Donna agreed, while tuning her bass guitar, getting ready for a gig. "If anyone can do this, it's you." Their words were like a pat on the back, keeping me going. Everything was on track, maybe a bit behind schedule, but what's life without a few delays, right? Then, out of nowhere, it all fell apart. I woke up one morning thinking I had the flu, but it turned out to be something much worse. Long story short, I ended up in the hospital with a stack of medical bills as thick as an encyclopedia. "Miss Mary, your insurance covered some of it," said the lady in billing, with a voice that always seemed to carry bad news. "But you still owe quite a bit," she said, sliding a bill across the desk that made my heart sink. There went my college savings, swallowed up by numbers and decimal points I couldn't even understand. I tried to ask for a payment plan or something, but I had nothing left to give. I told her how much I just wanted to crawl into a hole and give up. "It's not personal, hon, it's just the system," she said, but it sure felt personal to me. Back at our apartment, the mood was as stale as the pizza we'd left out overnight. "There go the textbooks," I muttered, flipping through pages of legal terms I still hadn't memorized. We sat there, two dreams on hold, trapped in the harsh reality of our cramped living space. "What next?" Donna asked after a long, uncomfortable silence. I didn't have an answer, just a bunch of questions swirling in my head. It felt like I was back at square one, but somehow even further behind than when I started. Start over, I finally said. What else can I do? I'm not the type to give up. It sounded confident, but even I could hear the tremble in my voice. They both nodded, but the worry was written all over their faces. Yeah, I get it. Our place is too crowded, I whispered into the phone, the words bitter as they left my mouth. Mom couldn't see me swallow the lump in my throat or the way my hand shook. You're tough, Mary. You'll figure it out, Dad said before handing the phone back to Mom. The bench at the bus stop was hard against my back as I sat there, trying to figure out my next move while people rushed past me. Linda, with her new baby and picture-perfect life, didn't even come to the phone, probably didn't want to catch my bad luck through the line. Family, right? The guy sitting next to me said, catching the end of my call. He was wearing an old jacket and had a 6 o'clock shadow at 8 in the morning. Yeah, family, I echoed, not really in the mood to talk, but somehow it felt comforting to speak to a stranger. Hey, don't let it get you down. You look like you've got some fight in you, he said, crinkling the paper bag in his hand. I managed a half smile. Got any tips for sleeping on one of these benches? I joked, but the humor didn't quite reach my eyes. He looked over, squinting at the bench like he was sizing it up. Buses run all night. Ride them end to end. Safer than a bench, he said, his words hanging in the air as my phone buzzed with a low battery warning. Great, another thing to add to today's list of problems. The bus hissed as it pulled up in front of us, its doors opening wide, inviting us to go wherever it was heading. The guy got on, finding a seat among the tired faces of nighttime commuters. I stayed behind, gripping my bus fare tight in my fist, not ready to just ride around aimlessly. I pulled my suitcase and started walking, the wheels making a lonely sound on the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered above me, and in that shaky light, I made a silent promise. This isn't how my story ends. Holding on to that thought, I walked through the night. Every step was a refusal to give up, every breath a promise that I'd fight my way out of this. Come on over, kid. Aunt Laura's voice came through the phone, steadying me like a lifeline. I never thought I'd be so happy to hear her raspy tone. When I got to her place, she didn't waste time with small talk. You look like hell, was her greeting as she guided me inside, her hand firm on my back. I spent the first few days in her guest room, trying to pull myself together. She didn't push me to talk, she wasn't the type for cozy heart-to-hearts, but I could tell she was waiting for me to open up. Finally, as we sat at her cluttered kitchen table, surrounded by plants as tough as she was, Aunt Laura set down her mug and looked at me with those piercing eyes. What do you want, Mary? Really want? Her question made me nervous, like I was on one of those makeovers shows about to reveal the new me. But I was too tired to dodge the truth. I want to be a lawyer, Aunt Laura, I said, my voice edged with desperation I couldn't hide. She nodded like she already knew. If that's the case, she said, tapping her fingers on the table, the sound mixing with the ticking of the wall clock, I'll pay for your education. My heart jumped, flooded with a sudden rush of hope. Are you serious? As serious as a heart attack, she replied, but then raised a finger, her condition clear. But you keep your grades up, no slacking. Her tone was stern, but there was a spark in her eyes that told me she believed in me. I couldn't stop the grin that spread across my face. Really? I asked, almost in disbelief. Really? I didn't save all my money just to blow it on bingo and whiskey, she said. I stood up and hugged her tight, the words, thank you, getting caught between us. None of that mushy stuff, she grumbled, but she patted my back before pulling away. And you're going to work for me part-time. I need more help around here than I like to admit. What kind of work? I asked. I was eager, ready to do whatever needed to be done. The kind that needs doing, she said vaguely, waving her hand like it was no big deal. We'll start with that mess you call a room and move on to the yard tomorrow. I laughed a real hearty laugh, something I hadn't done in a long time. Deal. Don't think I'm just being nice, Aunt Laura warned. If you slack off, the deal's off. I shook my head, the seriousness of her words sinking in. It won't happen. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. Good. Now help me with these damn plants, they've got a better social life than I do. I spent the rest of the day covered in soil, pruning and watering, but the dirt never felt so good on my hands. Aunt Laura made me work for every penny she was offering, and that was fine by me. College wasn't easy. Aunt Laura had given me a big break, but balancing school and bills was like juggling knives. One slip, and it could hurt. I'd wake up in the mornings after cramming for civil procedure, my alarm buzzing like a bee trapped in a jar, books spread out on the desk like a buffet I didn't want to touch. When my stomach reminded me I needed to eat, I'd head to the nearest food spot on campus. Maria, who worked the counter, would always give me a knowing look. Make it a double? Long night ahead? She'd ask. Yeah, I'd say, grabbing the coffee and sandwich. You're going to burn out if you keep this up, Maria would warn. Can't burn out when you're on fire, I'd joke, even though I felt more like I was burning out than blazing. Nights blurred into a mix of flashcards and frayed nerves. Every time my phone buzzed, it was either a bill reminder or a message from Aunt Laura asking how my day was. I always told her it was better than it actually was. Then everything changed overnight. Aunt Laura got really sick, life-threatening sick. I held her hand more times than I could count in that too-quiet hospital room. There wasn't much to say. What do you say when the person who's been your rock is fading away? Who's going to yell at me for eating cookies in bed when you're gone? I tried to joke during one of those visits, trying to keep things light. You better not, she whispered, her voice barely there. Crumbs everywhere. We never talked about the money. It was like an unspoken agreement, the elephant in the room no one wanted to mention. After she passed, I found myself in a stiff lawyer's office, more nervous than I'd ever been. I was more nervous than I'd ever been for any exam, sitting there with a lawyer, a stiff man with a comb-over and glasses slipping down his nose. She left you the house, Mary, he said. It was like Aunt Laura was still looking out for me. She what? I blinked, my mind coming to a halt. The house, he repeated, fiddling with some papers. And a considerable amount to cover your student debts. The rest is up to you to figure out. Laura was clear about you making your own way. Despite the lump in my throat, I asked, did she say anything else? He adjusted his glasses. She said she believed in you and that she'd haunt you if you gave up. I laughed through my tears. That was so like Aunt Laura. As I left the office that day, I felt both heavier and lighter. She'd given me more than just a house. She'd given me her belief that I could finish this journey, even without her. I was deep into studying for my next big exam when I heard a knock, 3 sharp raps that told me this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. I opened the front door of Aunt Laura's my house, and there they were. Mom, Dad, Linda, and her husband Adam, like some grim family reunion. Linda didn't waste any time. Mary, look at us all together again in this big house, she said, her tone dripping with fake cheer. Like a twisted sitcom, isn't it? I replied, leaning against the doorframe. Dad spoke in that tone that always meant he expected me to just listen. We've been talking. We think this house should be for Linda. She's got kids, a family, he said. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Seriously? I replied, heavy sarcasm in my voice. Wrong house for that conversation. Mom's lips tightened, a sign she was gearing up for a guilt trip. You'll understand when you have your own family. It's just practical. I must have missed the part where practical meant kicking me out of my own home. I shot back, crossing my arms. Linda batted her eyelashes at me, then looked to Adam for support. He just shrugged. This house is wasted on you. We could fill it with laughter, children running around. And what? Turn Aunt Laura's parlor into a playroom. The idea tasted like acid in my mouth. There's no need to be rude, Adam mumbled, finally finding his voice. Right, because showing up to claim my house is the height of good manners, I snapped back. You're being selfish, Mary, Dad grunted, sure he was right. I let out a bitter laugh. Selfish. After all those years of barely remembering her with a birthday card? Convenient memory you've got there. They shifted uncomfortably, not expecting their plan to go this way. Linda, predictably, broke the silence. You can be such a... she started, but I cut her off. Don't. Just leave. As they walked out the door, burdened by their disbelief and entitlement, Dad turned to me and said, You'll regret this. I stood tall, looking him straight in the eye. The only thing I'll regret is not changing the lock sooner. The door closed behind them, leaving me in the quiet. Inheritance or not, I was holding on to Aunt Laura's legacy, not selling it off to the highest bidder in my family. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that sticks to your bones. After a double shift at the law firm, all I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. But when I tried to unlock the door, the key just scraped against metal. What the? I muttered, fiddling with the key. That's when the door swung open, and there stood Linda, holding little Amy on her hip, a smug look on her face. Changed the locks, Mary. Surprise, she said. My eyebrows shot up. Like hell you did. This is my house. She smirked. Not anymore, she replied, bouncing Amy, who seemed blissfully unaware of the drama. Anger bubbled up inside me. Watch me, I said, already dialing. Her smirk wavered. As the dispatcher answered, Linda's confidence slipped. Yes, my sister has illegally entered and changed the locks on my house, I said loudly into the phone. Just then, Dad's truck pulled into the driveway, with Mom by his side, looking like they were staging an intervention. Mary, be reasonable, Mom started, her eyes wet like she was in some soap opera. I'm past reasonable, I replied, not hiding the edge in my voice. Adam, a good foot taller than me, stepped up, trying to look intimidating. Come on, Mary, he said in a low voice. Don't make a scene. I held up my phone, the recording button clearly visible. Say that again, Adam, for the camera, I insisted. His face turned pale. Sirens cut through the tension as a cop car pulled up. The officer stepped out, all serious looks and business. What seems to be the problem here? One asked. Their bravado crumbled like stale bread. Dad's voice lost its strength. It's a misunderstanding, officers. Family matter. Stealing my house is a bit more than a family matter, I replied, my voice steady. I crossed my arms as I spoke. The officers looked between us, taking in the situation, clearly experienced in handling this kind of thing. All right, let's start with some ID, and we'll go from there, one of them said, pulling out a notepad. Linda reluctantly handed Amy to Mom and dug into her purse. The legal process had begun. They asked questions, and we gave answers. Dad and Mom tried to put on a show, but the deed to the house was in my name, signed and sealed by Aunt Laura's will. Can you prove you live here, ma'am? The officer asked me. Better I can prove I own it, I replied, reaching for my briefcase in the car. Seeing Aunt Laura's will felt like the first real breath I'd taken since this all started. The officers read through it, their eyebrows rising and falling as they absorbed the legal details. Seems clear to us, one officer said, folding the papers back into the briefcase. I suggest you hand over a set of keys to Miss here, or we'll have to proceed with charges for breaking and entering and unlawful eviction. Linda reluctantly handed over a set of keys. Mom and Dad went silent, and Adam looked like he wished the ground would swallow him up. The cops escorted them off the property. Mom gave me a look like I'd kicked her puppy, but the law was the law, no room for sob stories. The door closed behind me with a click, like the final word in an argument. I leaned against it, my hands shaking from the adrenaline rush. I trudged into the kitchen to make a much-needed cup of coffee. As the kettle boiled, I thought about what my next move should be. The solid click of the lock snapping into place felt like the end of a long, bad joke. My house, now a fortress, just needed one more thing to be perfect. Maybe I'll get a big, nasty dog, I muttered to no one in particular. I wasn't much of a pet person, but the thought of a drooling beast scaring off any unwanted family visits brought a smirk to my face. Weeks passed, and the silence from my family was louder than any argument we'd ever had. No calls, not even a lousy text. Sometimes, late at night, when the work was done and the quiet was too overwhelming, I felt the weight of it all. I often find myself on Linda's social media page. She has a flair for drama, photos of the kids with sad eyes and pouty lips, captions meant to tug at my guilt. Little Peter wishes he had a yard to play in, or Amy's third birthday without Auntie Mary. I chuckle every time. Does she think I've forgotten why I stood my ground? Does she expect me to feel sorry? I remember all too well the days when I begged for help with my college fees and got nothing but lectures about responsibility and tough love. I can still feel the cold slam of the door when I was broke and desperate, and they told me they had no room for me. The way my own foundation crumbled beneath me. No, my new life is something I built myself, paying my dues in full, fighting my battles alone. No amount of sad pictures will erase the past they wish I'd forget. I thought about posting a reply once, something snappy and a little mean, but why bother? I had work to do. A stack of files on my desk didn't care about family feuds. I had clients who depended on me, and that's where I chose to focus my energy. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'd pour myself a glass of bourbon and sit in my backyard, the same yard they wanted to take from me. I'd savor the quiet and think about that guard dog again. A big one with a bark that would make my family think twice before stepping onto the porch. Maybe a Rottweiler or a Mastiff, something with some bite. My phone stayed silent, a dead limb I'd long since learned to live without. And when I finally went to bed, I'd sleep soundly, not caring whether I was just or wicked. No ghosts of guilt, no restless thoughts about what might have been, just the peace of knowing that everything around me was mine, earned by me alone. The last thing I'd think about each night was that dog. Maybe I'd get one, maybe I wouldn't. But the choice was mine, and that was good enough for me.